all those who have given to the treasury. For they all put out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. They had a group of trumpet-shaped collection areas for people to pour in their offering. Well, can't you see the picture? Number one, it's in front of everyone. So the rich would go in, and Jesus says he watched how they put in their money. They're making clang, 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 as they're dumping their money from several feet higher than the trumpets. And, they're going down in these containers, and they're making all kinds of money. And you know what everyone was doing who was watching? What were they doing? Ooh. Look how much they put in. Then a widow comes up. She puts in 2 little copper coins that are hardly worth anything. Now, Jesus said, I tell you that she's put in more than all the rest. Do you see what that means? Jesus not only sees how much we give, Jesus sees how much we keep for ourselves. So there is nothing hidden. And Jesus says of her offering, she gave in all that she had. She didn't give out of her abundance. I knew a person once in the county in which I lived in. Every year for Christmas, she wrote a $100 check to every church in the county. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And I always thought that was a great thing. And I had someone tell me, do you realize how much money that she has? It'd be the same as you or I giving a dime to every church in the county. You see, my friends, it's an interesting thing. Tithing, it doesn't really matter how much or how little we have. It is a principle that is set out in scriptures. Jesus makes a point. And this widow story that we're going to see, she's going to give the last of everything that she has. And her step of faith in doing that is going to be recorded twice in the Bible. I don't know about you, but I think it'd be pretty cool that if my story was recorded twice in the Bible. And in both accounts, it was the offering of the poor. And so it's just a principle that there is in our hearts and lives. If we give to the Lord first, it will work. If we don't give to the Lord, the book of Malachi says that if you don't tithe, it's the same as stealing from God. That's what it says. Read it. Malachi chapter 3. Would you rob God? Anybody here want to be guilty of robbing God? Pretty sure not. And so it just lays out this principle here. But I think it's important to understand as it does it, it repeats it for us in the New Testament, this entire story. And both of these, which is amazing to me, are the offerings of women who are very poor. And yet they're still putting the Lord first because there's still that principle. And the Bible lays out a whole thing in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 on sowing and reaping in the very context of giving. Those who sow sparingly are going to reap sparingly. Those who sow generously are going to reap generously. So it is a principle all the way down. So it's a sliding scale. Now, I'll tell you a personal experience. When I was on the farm, we were rich. I never thought I was rich, but, we were. We had lots of money. My parents were very frugal with their money, but we had lots of money. And you know what? I'd write some generous checks to the church. I'm pretty sure that a little church that we were involved in, we were maybe one of the bigger givers in that church. But we weren't tithers. I wasn't giving 10%. We went from that situation to poverty. As we left the farm, got disowned by my dad, Then my weekly salary was $5 a week. Okay, and no, it wasn't 1928, okay? You know, it was in the 70s. And seriously, the Lord tapped me on the shoulder one day and said, let's talk about this tithing thing again. Now, you know what the tithe of $5 is? It's 50 cents. I want to tell you something. When you only have $5, it doesn't matter whether you have $5 or $4.50. Then we got a raise. We got $10 a week. But you know what the reality is? It didn't matter whether we had $10 or $9. And then as it just kept going on, and the Lord just taught me that, and, you know, placed it within my heart, just put the Lord first. Stop arguing about it. Stop worrying about it. Put the Lord first, and somehow He's going to make it all work out. When we were expecting our first child, we had no insurance, and we didn't receive any government help. And we paid cash for Israel to be born at Desert Hospital and paid the doctor. And we were making, at that time, $50 a month. And somehow, as we tithed off of that, God multiplied it to this day. I still do not know how we did it. We had 2 children with no insurance, 0 help from Medicare or any government assistance whatsoever, and paid cash for 2 of our children, and God just blessed it. But the reason being is because we were putting the Lord first. What's going to happen to this widow? And the reality is, if you only have enough flour to make 1 cake and die, does it matter whether you die today or tomorrow? Okay? So really, she's at the end of her rope anyway, right? And it's interesting. What does the man of God say? The man of God tells her, feed me first. Give it to the Lord first. You have to take this step of faith, but it's not going to run out. The reality is this: little is much in the hands of the Lord. Do you believe that? You know, I have always marveled through the years how God has provided even for the church here. Even during the hardest times, God has always made provision. And we have really never had someone who bankrolled us, gave us $1 million. That hasn't happened. But my friends, it's been ordinary people doing what they could and tithing off of what they had. God blesses it, breaks it, multiplies it. And the reality is, then around the world, ministries are blessed. Here at home, ministries are blessed. People are saved. You know, we just had Vacation Bible School, and it's so wonderful. The day that they prayed and the kids asked the Lord into their heart, and there were hundreds that came forward. It was a powerful move of God's Spirit. And, you know, I'm so excited. We are signing the lease tomorrow. We finally got the price negotiated to what was acceptable, but we are renting what used to be the pawn shop down where the Casa Market and the Jelly Donut is, and the Spanish ministry is moving down there. So they are so excited. If you were here Sunday, Alfredo was so funny because he said, you know, you got to understand Mexicans. They're going to be where there's menudo, tacos, and donuts. So, you know, it was a blast. All right. In verse number 12, then she said, as the Lord your God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I'm gathering a couple sticks that I may go and prepare it for myself and my son that we may eat and die. And Elijah said, do not fear, and do as you have said, but make me first a small cake from it and bring it to me, so afterwards make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth. So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah. And she and her household ate for many days. And the bin of flour was not used up, nor was the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken by Elijah. I want to tell you a miracle story in my life. When I left the farm, I felt a great responsibility to my dad not to leave him in a lurch, even though it was very difficult, and he was telling me every day how much he hated me and wished I was dead and all of that stuff. I promised him I'd see him through till the fall crops were finished. And my last job was baling up the feed for the cows for the wintertime. And maybe you've seen pictures of them, the great big round bales that are like 5 feet tall. That's what I was doing. I was making those bales. And it was getting ready to rain. I was on the last field, and I knew I wanted to finish it. But I knew that, in a couple hours it was going to start raining. And I was running out of twine to wrap up the bales. And I was praying and praying that God would just make the twine last. And all of a sudden, I was on the last, I was on a bale, and I ran out of twine. I knew that if I had to run to town, it'd be raining by the time that I got back, and I wouldn't be able to finish. And I looked in the windrow right in front of me, and there was another bale of twine. It was just laying there in the midst of the field. God just dropped it there. He even used the same brand as what I was using, And there was no way for that to be there. And I was able to finish the job, and on my last bale, I used the last of the twine, and as I was pulling out of the field, it started raining, and it rained for 2 weeks. But I had finished what God had spoken to me to do, and he gave me this miracle at the very end that said, even when it doesn't look like there's a way, there's always a way. And in the reality of my life, I seriously have got to do things that people who are billionaires have not gotten to do. I've seen and done and experienced things that are just a blessing from God beyond measure. And so God's taking care of this widow. The scripture goes on. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. And his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, what have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and kill my son? Oh! You see, she has a guilty conscience, doesn't she? She realizes that her past has been a sinful life. God is working in her life, and he's going to do a miracle that is far deeper. Maybe this child was the result of an adulterous or an immoral affair. But all of a sudden now her son becomes sick, and now she's coming back. I know that I sinned. God is punishing me. How many people have you ever known that felt that God was punishing them for their sins? And what did God want to do? God wanted to bring life at this place. God loved this woman who was a sinner so much that he took a prophet that was an entire country away, made him travel through a country in which he was a wanted man to get to where she was for this day and for this miracle. And the Bible goes on, and he said to her, give me your son. And he took him out of her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and he laid him on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy upon the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son? You see, he didn't understand either. Now, my friends, what's God doing in Elijah's life? God is bringing Elijah to where he has to grow in his own faith. You know why? There is a huge test of faith awaiting him.